All right, I'm on my last review. I gotta review The Dark Knight Rises, and then I'll continue on with the Nolan review series. And I'm by myself. Why the fuck am I still doing my Batman voice? Fuck it. So then we got Interstellar.
So The Dark Knight Rises tells the story of Batman coming out of an 8-year retirement to fight a masked vigilante who quite literally has Gotham by the balls. Well, we're here, everybody, the final review in the Nolan Batman trilogy, the Dark Knight trilogy, and continuing on forward to the rest of my Nolan reviews that I'm going to try like hell to get out by the time Tenet comes out and I get my review out sometime on Tuesday, but one or two of them might fall after Tuesday. Who knows how things are going to go, but I'm going to try. But now we are here. We are at possibly the most divisive and certainly the most heavily criticized movie in Nolan's filmography. Now, I'll be honest with you, this was a movie that was probably one of the highest anticipated movies that I've ever seen in my life. Coming off the high of The Dark Knight and my fandom of Batman and what Nolan had brought to the Batman lore and to what we expect from a superhero film, when The Dark Knight Rises was coming out, there's very few movies that I can remember in my life me being that excited and that consumed by, to where I could not stand going to work that day knowing that I had to wait all day to finally go to the theater that night. I was so excited for it. And when I came out of it, I was much higher on my praise than most people seem to be. I don't know if that was just the high of my first experience or if what Nolan went for in this movie worked more for me. And I'll be honest with you, this most recent rewatch, a lot of my thoughts in this movie have changed in both directions. There's things that I didn't like before that I started to appreciate this time, and there's things that I liked before that bugged me a little bit this time. So this review is going to be interesting because most of the other reviews have been thoughts that are mostly concrete. This one has changed quite a bit. With that being said, let's get into the positives of The Dark Knight Rises. And the main one for me is that I love Tom Hardy's Bane. I'm a Tom Hardy whore. Through and through, I have no shame. I love that dude. I love mostly everything that he has done. Anytime that he signs on to a big role, it automatically has my attention. And whenever he got cast as Bane, I was just coming down from the high of seeing Warrior and how huge and how muscular and intimidating he was in that movie. And he wasn't even quite up to Bane size yet. So I was like, holy shit, this guy's gonna be awesome as Bane.
Fight like a younger man. There's nothing held back. It's admirable, but mistaken. Oh, you think darkness is your ally?
And while he is one of those elements that is mostly divisive about this film because of the way that he talks and the volume and, you know, the accent and everything like that, to me it works. The performance works, the physicality of it works, he's scary, he's ferocious, he's smart and cunning, which is not a version of Bane that we have gotten on the big screen up to this point. It's a lot more comic book accurate, where he's an actual villain that can handle going toe-to-toe with Batman aside from just being larger than life, huge whenever you inject venom into him. I like the grounded take that they give this character and not having the venom thing, but more so his mask being something that just keeps pain from his chronic injuries at bay, which I also would assume give him an advantage in fighting to where he's getting hit and he's not really feeling the blows. So I like that. It works for me. The voice, the accent, the mannerisms and everything that Tom Hardy brought to him works for me as well. That's one thing that did not change. I still love his version of Bane, and I think that he is a fantastic villain for this movie.
At least you can talk! Who are you?
It doesn't matter who we are. What matters is our plan.
I also loved Anne Hathaway as Selina Kyle or Catwoman. Anne Hathaway is one of those actresses that I either really like what she does or I really dislike what she does. Seeing her, you know, in interviews and stuff like that, she seems like kind of an annoying person. So she's not an actress that I would say that I love, even though she's obviously world class. But her version of Selina Kyle and Catwoman is probably my favorite on-screen version. I'm not really somebody that has a lot of close ties to the Tim Burton movies, so I love what she brought to this character. I thought that it was cool. There's some darkness to her. She's certainly got the sexiness down. She's got the ferocity down. She's got some of the coolest fight scenes in the movie, which is something I've criticized this entire trilogy for. Don't really have that problem with Catwoman, and I like her chemistry and her back and forth with Bruce Wayne and with Christian Bale, which is something that I nagged The Dark Knight a little bit for, because I didn't think that Maggie Gyllenhaal had the best chemistry with him. But I think that Anne Hathaway does. So I like her version of Catwoman. And as somebody that is kind of a villainous person, but also has that kind of toes the line of vigilante like Batman, and also has to be believable as somewhat of a romantic interest, especially with the way that the story decides to end, I buy into it because of Anne Hathaway's performance.
Come with me. Save yourself. You don't owe these people anymore. You've given them everything.
Not everything. Not yet.
And when we're talking about performances, I mean, you can kind of talk ad nauseum about the acting quality in the entire Dark Knight trilogy. It's awesome, it's world class, it has an amazing cast, and all of them bring it. Michael Caine, and the little bit that he is in this movie, he is the best performance possibly, I mean, aside from maybe like Heath Ledger as Joker, possibly in the entire trilogy, because he is so heartbreaking in this movie, where he gets to the point where he honestly feels and believes in his soul that Bruce Wayne's not going to stop until he dies for Gotham. And as his father figure, he can't stand to be around that, can't stand to see that. The scene whenever he has to finally tell him that Rachel was not going to pick him is heartbreaking, because you can feel the hesitation in his voice, knowing that this is going to maybe completely sever his relationship with Bruce Wayne, but possibly save his life. And then the scene at the end of the movie, whenever he's looking down at Bruce Wayne's grave, and he's saying to Martha Wayne and to Thomas Wayne that I failed you, and you left me in charge of everything that you loved, and I failed. That stuff will kill you down to your core if you've been invested in these characters. So Michael Caine, I haven't seen a lot of his filmography, but it's possible that this movie might be his best performance of his career. This movie has some very large-scale, kick-ass, and memorable sequences, just like The Dark Knight had. The main one for me being the opening sequence with this plane, and an even larger plane that tethers itself to that plane and then tears it to shit, and that entire robbery, double-cross, kidnapping, whatever you want to call it, is just a very cool, creative, and beautifully shot scene. There's a lot of other scenes like that in this movie. There's a lot more large-scale battles and large-scale scenes where you definitely see the IMAX camera being put to use here, where Christopher Nolan wants to capture how many people are involved in this little scuffle with Bane and Batman just sitting in the middle somewhere. That stuff is very impressive. It makes this third film feel very much epic, and they're very memorable sequences amongst the entire trilogy. And finally, I do like most of the ways that they conclude this storyline and conclude this trilogy, as far as Batman kind of fulfilling his destiny and what the term Batman, what the symbol of Batman ends up meaning. It ties, a lot of the themes of this movie kind of tie back to Batman Begins. I've talked a lot about the individual themes, and this one being pain, the pain of Bruce Wayne, the pain of Gotham as it continues to just not be a city, a city that's basically built on a lie that can crumble at any point, and then whenever Bane exposes that, it just continues to crumble under the people. You have the whole pain aspect with Bane himself, which is much more direct, much more in your face as far as that theme. So that stuff is cool, just like the other two prominent themes in the first two movies. But a lot of storylines and a lot of things tail back to Batman Begins in this movie, which I really enjoy, because I really love the first movie. It might be my favorite. So when they come back here and everything goes full crescendo and you wrap back around and things loop back and make sense with things that how they started this trilogy, I appreciate that. To me, that's very good writing. And like I said, for the most part, I enjoy and I appreciate and I'm satisfied with where they decide to end the story in the tale of The Dark Knight.
Hey, heads down! This is it!
No! That's Batman!
Now moving into some mixed aspects, and this is one of the ones that changed for me upon this most recent rewatch, and that's Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character of John Blake, I believe his name is, or if you want to call him Robin, which they kind of hint at the very end. This character on this most recent rewatch kind of felt useless to the movie. I love Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I love him as an actor. I think that he's very good in this movie as far as his performance, and I like his character's interaction with Batman and Bruce Wayne and Commissioner Gordon. But if you take him out of the movie, I don't think the movie is all that different. I mean, he has this kind of, golden boy sense about him, to where he's going to be this, this white knight cop that wants to do right and doesn't like corruption. So he kind of has this instant relationship with Commissioner Gordon that gets no development whatsoever before Commissioner Gordon is taken out of the movie. Then you have this scene, which I'm going to develop more on later, where he deduces that Bruce Wayne is Batman because of his face. and goes to talk to Bruce Wayne, confronts him, says we need the Batman back. So then you get a little bit of relationship there where Bruce Wayne's like, all right, this dude figured me out, I guess I'll talk to him a little bit. And he does help in the end as far as gathering kids and stuff like that. But I honestly think, for as padded as this movie is, if you take him out of the movie completely, and I don't even think we need the end scene where he becomes the new Batman, or it hints at that, or Robin, or whatever you want to call it, you could take a lot of that out of the movie, and I think the movie is just as strong. I mean, there's some things that he does, like that final scene, that is definitely good stuff that I like. But for a padded movie like this, for a movie that is so long, which I'll develop on more again as well, the length of it, I feel like you could have done more with his character if he was going to be that prominent of a piece of your story. Now moving on to the negatives. And some of them, which I'm going to get out first, are negatives that carry over from The Dark Knight. One of which is conveniences and very convenient writing. And my God, if you thought The Dark Knight had conveniences, The Dark Knight Rises just straight up says, fuck it. This is just how our movie's going to go. Don't ask too many questions. There are so many things in this movie that makes your logic just go, whoa, way the fuck out there, to where if you even try to make sense of it, the whole movie just crumbles. And I do not like seeing flaws like that with a filmmaker like Christopher Nolan. Just like I said with The Dark Knight, these are small things in lesser films, things that you would call nitpicking in lesser films, but because it's Christopher Nolan, and because it's the Dark Knight trilogy, and it's such a prestigious thing that is done so well in so many of the aspects of delivering a quality film, that when you have something that's so lazy and silly, like little plot holes and little conveniences like this, they stand out so much more to me. So I'll try to remember and kind of go over all of them somewhat in chronological order. Some of them are small, some of them are major. We have Bruce Wayne, who's old and decrepit, and he has this cane from his injuries, which I'm assuming is from the Dark Knight when he fell. And quickly that just kind of goes away when he goes and he gets this little mechanical knee brace, and it shows him immediately kick a brick pillar and blow the bricks out. That would have shattered his foot. I'm sorry, it might seem cool on the surface, but when you have somebody, when you're trying to be that realistic about human injuries where he's got no cartilage and, you know, he goes to the doctor, just the scene before this, and it basically says, dude, you're fucked, you're not doing anything. And he just puts a little knee brace on and blows through a concrete wall. No, that doesn't work for me. Then you have that whole thing with John Blake being able to tell that he's Batman from some stupid ass story where he's like, oh, you know, I was an orphan and I had to learn how to put on a happy face. And when I was a kid and we saw you, I recognized that fake happy face. And ever since then, I've known you were Batman. And to me, that was like, you seriously could not have found a lazier way to make that plot point make sense. You could have had this guy find a multitude of things to show that Bruce Wayne is or was Batman, and you expect us to go along with that. No, that doesn't work for me either. Then one of the big ones that really stood out to me this time that didn't used to be that big of a deal to me was the actual prison that Bane puts Bruce Wayne in, and is very much tied to the origins of Bane and then eventually Talia al Ghul whenever she is revealed. So you have this hole in the middle of nowhere to where every single prisoner is there and they know or possibly have all tried to climb to the top, and there's this one little gap between two pillars that everybody fails at except for that one person that got out. And you have grown-ass men, and even Bruce Wayne, who is supposed to be a badass motherfucker, jumping and not coming anywhere close to closing this gap. But they want you to believe the fact that a young female child made that gap easily because she didn't put a rope on and I guess just believed in herself or whatever. That makes zero fucking sense. And then you have the whole thing where Bruce Wayne does the exact same thing.
Fatality.
I told you it could not be done.
You told me a child did it.
And then you have Batman, who is literally broken. Back is broken by Bane, and he's thrown into this prison, and he's immobilized, and he's just going to be there, crippled, and allowed to only see this television screen that's going to show him the destruction of Gotham as his final punishment before he eventually dies in this prison. How do they fix this? They punch him in his fucking back and heal his broken back. Fuck you, seriously. I mean, the fact that you expect us to go along with that might be the laziest thing in this movie, where you have a broken back and you just have some random motherfucker in a prison hit him one time in the back and say, stay here until you can walk. Even if you want to make the gigantic logic gap that will actually somewhat work, I'm sorry, that motherfucker is not getting back into the fighting ring anytime soon if that's the only treatment that he is getting. Damn sure not building up himself to take on Bane the way that he does and finally be triumphant in the end. Not buying it. Not buying it for a second. Then Bruce Wayne escapes and then instantly shows back up at Gotham with absolutely no resources shown that he has used. He's broke. Everybody that he's friends with is under siege in Gotham. How did he get back? How did he get onto the island? Reasons. He just shows up. Knows exactly where Catwoman's going to be. Shows up, gives her a little speech in the shadows, and we have our Batman back. Then when he is on Gotham City and the clock is ticking, we are down to the wire. We are literally minutes away from everybody in Gotham, including the entire city, being blown to fucking hell. And Batman takes the time to crawl up to a bridge, paint a gigantic bat on it with gasoline, have a little trail that comes all the way down to where Gordon's gonna be. It's all these small little things that are just made for a cool little quick visual, but if you stop to think about it for more than a second, you're like, hold up, what? And then the last one, which is one that I think most people would debate. And this is one that, again, I used to not have an issue with, but because I love Michael Caine's character and his performance so much in this, and every time I rewatch it, it works more for me, I don't buy the fact, even though I appreciate how it calls back to the beginning, I don't buy the fact that he would go through all of this heartbreak for presumably months, blaming himself, grieving for Bruce Wayne, and then finally seeing him across the way at that cafe and simply nodding and walking away. I just don't buy that. I mean, I understand he told that story about I had this fantasy where I would know that you were safe and you've gotten out and I wouldn't say anything to you and you wouldn't say anything to me, but we would know that you were safe. I love that story. I love the way that they call back to it. But to me, it just doesn't work in the reality of it. I think that if Alfred was like, oh my God, it's him, and went over and hugged him or did anything like that, to me, that would be more believable. And it would still work as a little crescendo from the beginning of the movie because, yeah, that was my fantasy, but I just love you too much, and obviously I'm glad that you're safe. Give me a hug. Like, and I'm sure people are gonna argue with that. I'm sure Brian Lomax is gonna be one of them. No, that doesn't work. I think that it would work. And I don't buy the fact that he would just go, oh, it's him. Cool. Moving past that, I'm not a big fan of the whole storyline involving this bomb, this, MacGuffin item that has to be found and taken away so that Gotham can survive. I think that's just kind of a lame plot point to surface the entire climax of the movie around. And I do not like at all the entire storyline and reveal of Talia al Ghul. I love Marion Cotillard as an actress. I think that she is gorgeous. I totally pick up on the fact that she would be great as the role of Talia, and I totally buy into the attraction that her and Bruce Wayne have, even though there's not a whole lot of screen time and they seem to get together very quickly. But I cannot stand the way that this movie decides to reveal that to us, because on this most recent rewatch, it is blatantly obvious throughout the entire film who she is. And most people knew who she was just out of speculation before they walked into The Dark Knight Rises. That's one of the little pitfalls that we have as comic book fans. Whenever we know the lore, we know characters, we know how certain things are set up. Even people were suspecting that John Blake was going to be Robin, and they were somewhat correct about that. So there's that, but if you pay attention to the story, and pay attention to her placement in the story, and you pay attention to these flashbacks with this young girl that is clearly a girl and doesn't look like a young Bane, it's very easy to figure out where the story is going and figure out where she's going to play into the end of the story, especially whenever you get to the last act of the movie and Bruce Wayne and Lucius Fox are carried away and Bane's like, bring her to me, and she brings her over. Like, at that point, it's blatantly obvious. It's like, oh, yeah, because she's Talia. She reveals herself, stabs him, so obvious, basically reduces Bane down to a lapdog, which I hate because I love him as a villain and him as a character. So you have the weaker villain by far that is now taking away power from the stronger villain. I hate that. Then you have the whole chase scene at the end where they're chasing her and she ends up crashing down into this the little space between the highway and crashes down into the lower level and dies from the crash. Meanwhile, Gordon's in the back with this fucking bomb bouncing all over the goddamn place, and he walks out totally fine. But no, she's dead, and you will struggle to find in an A-list movie a lamer performance of a death than this. So yeah, Talia al Ghul, not a fan. Then down to one of the bigger problems that I have with this movie, and that is the utilization of Bruce Wayne and Batman. You heard me bitch in my last review that as strong as a Batman fan as I am, I prefer my Batman movies to focus on Batman, and I want the villains to service Batman and his story. And I feel like Batman Begins does that very well. I feel like The Dark Knight very quickly and easily becomes the Joker's movie. And I feel this movie, even quicker and easier, becomes Bane's movie. And Batman is reduced to basically just this rise and fall action twice in this movie, to where he's been out of commission for 8 years, he's a hermit, he's basically has no relationships with anybody except for a little bit that he has still going on with Alfred. He's broken down, he's got a cane. I hate all of that shit as it is, because no, that's not my Bruce Wayne. Then he has to build himself back up to becoming Batman. So the first hour or so of the movie is him building back up to his ultimate return as the Dark Knight. Then quickly he's broken, thrown into prison, and then the next hour of the movie is about him building back up to being the Dark Knight. And it's like, we've seen this storyline 3 times now in this trilogy, and you're making this entire movie storyline of Bruce Wayne a double take of a storyline that we got back in 2004. Or was it 2005? It was 2005. Doesn't matter. We've seen the shit before. And it's to the point in this movie to where the Bruce Wayne Batman side of this movie is honestly boring to me. It's interesting when you first watch it to see where they're gonna tie in that cool ending of The Dark Knight that was so different, and Batman now has to be the enemy. And then they have to follow it up, and it's almost like they fucked themselves over by doing that. I had my criticisms of that ending in the last review and how they executed it, though I like that direction of the story. But I'm really disappointed with how they decided to follow that up with this, because you have this whole thing with the Dent Act and all this stuff built around this lie, and it's just, it seems like really far-fetched, and it seems like a direction to take the character of Bruce Wayne and Batman that I just don't want to see him go in. And I like it less every single time that I watch it. This time actually being to a point where it was a full-on negative on the movie. And look, I brought it up in the past 2 movies that I do not like the Christian Bale Batman growl voice. I used to be okay with it. Over time, it's grown to annoy me quite a bit. In this movie, it annoys me the most, because there is a number of scenes where it makes absolutely zero logical sense that he's using that voice. People are going to make the argument that whenever he's in the suit, he's fully embodied the character of Batman, and that's just part of who he is whenever he's in the suit. He's now Batman and has to talk like this. But there are scenes in this movie, one of which is supposed to be played for comedic value, but I laugh at it for the wrong reasons, to where there's nobody around to fucking hear him. He's got the scene with Catwoman where Catwoman leaves and he's like, "So that's what that feels like," and walks away, and I'm like, you're still doing the voice and nobody's there to fucking hear you. Then he's got a scene, I actually think there was a scene in The Dark Knight that I forgot to bitch about, where he's talking to Lucius Fox, and he's like, "Put your name in the computer and you'll understand." And I'm like, he already knows you're Bruce Wayne, dude. You know, you ain't gonna do that. And then you get to the end of this one, and even whenever he's being ultra cryptic, and Commissioner Gordon's like, "Look, we should know, I've never asked who your name is, but we should know who the Savior is." And he's like, "Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they just put a jacket on the shoulders of a boy and let him know that the world is not ending." And he's like, "Oh, that's Bruce Wayne, because I've only put jackets on one boy in my entire fucking life." But stop being cryptic, motherfucker. What's your name? Bruce Wayne. Good working with you. See ya. Shit like that drives me nuts in this movie. It's stupid things to me, to where the more I watch it, I'm like, oh. Couple more passes on the script, guys. Couple more passes. And my final negative is that this movie is overly long. It is overly stuffed. While I definitely admire the ambition that Christopher Nolan had for this movie and trying to make it this very much epic conclusion to this trilogy, and I'm sure the death of Heath Ledger fucked up his plans a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about that before I get to my rating. I think that this movie, it bites off more than it can chew. This past time when I was watching it, I was struggling to stay awake through part of it, to where it felt like it was already a movie worth of storyline, and I paused the movie and there was still an hour to go. And a good bit of that hour was just retreading storyline that we had already covered in the first hour of this movie. So I think that it is overly long. I think that it is overly stuffed. I mean, you could halfway make that criticism of The Dark Knight, but The Dark Knight is entertaining pretty much all the way through. This one, I feel like the runtime really weighs on its shoulders quite a bit. Now, as far as the initial plans for this third film, I don't really know what the actual plans were. I've had people comment and say, you know, different versions of what they heard or what they read Christopher Nolan's initial plan was for this third movie, assuming that Heath Ledger was not going to pass away. I've always looked at this film, I'm sure they did not scrap the story completely. I'm sure that most of what is in this movie is an idea that Christopher Nolan was building towards, because it just builds so well off of Batman Begins, or even Jonathan Nolan. I know I give a lot of credit to Christopher Nolan, but Jonathan Nolan was the writer. I feel like this movie would work better as two films. And I've always thought that if Heath Ledger had survived and did not tragically pass away the way that he did after The Dark Knight, that the storyline of this movie would be an awesome two-part conclusion, where you have one half of the movie, The Dark Knight Falls, for instance, would be the title, to where you basically have the exact same movie where Batman has been out of commission for a while because of Harvey Dent. Maybe not 8 years, but he's been out of commission for a while, in hiding, letting Harvey Dent be the shining example. Then he has to come back because of Bane, and it goes through basically the same exact motions up to the point where Bane breaks Batman, throws him in this prison, and takes siege of Gotham and releases all the prisoners in Blackgate. And I've always envisioned this scene ending a movie. And there would obviously have to be a little bit more going on to flesh that out to a full 2 hours, 2:15. To where you get to that scene where Bane has now taken over Gotham. He's got all these awesome speeches and all this awesome dialogue, and they release the prisoners of Blackgate, and either he walks out of the prison or they walk into the prison and you just see the Joker sitting there, and the movie just ends with the Joker being released once again. It's like, holy shit, where's this gonna go? Then you have The Dark Knight Rises, to where he has to build himself back up for a movie in this prison with a better explanation than getting punched in the fucking back. And Bane, the Joker, Two-Face, or, well, Two-Face is dead, Penguin, or some other villains that they wanted to have are now taking over Gotham, and it would be a much more epic conclusion as a two-parter. So I don't know if that was ever the plan, but I've always looked at this movie and said, you know what, there's two movies of story here, and I feel like Heath Ledger's Joker would have been perfect as a tease at the end that would have tied both of these together and let Bane stand on his own, but build up to a hell of a final fourth movie. So all in all, guys, on this most recent rewatch, this movie definitely went down quite a bit as far as my enjoyment of it. But with that being said, it's still a pretty damn good movie. I mean, the worst Christopher Nolan movie is still better than what 85% of directors can do on their best day. So I mean, that's a fact. Whether or not you love this movie or not, there's things in here that are so awesome and so brilliant, while having a lot of huge glaring flaws, certainly the most flaws of this entire trilogy, that it still ends up being a pretty good movie, a good conclusion, and worthy of being the conclusion to the Dark Knight trilogy. I don't think it's a gigantic drop-off. I just think it's a decent-sized drop-off. So I like this movie, certainly have a lot of problems with it that have grown over time, but it's still good. So if you're a fan of the Dark Knight trilogy, you want to see how this epic thing concludes, temper your expectations a little bit from the Dark Knight, but I think most of you will enjoy most of what goes on in this, while scratching your head quite a bit with some of the lazy writing and some of the conveniences that are abundant in this script. But it's still worthy of being part of your collection, so go out and buy it. So what do you guys think of The Dark Knight Rises? Do you love this film? Do you hate this film? Do you think that it's underrated, overrated? Where do you fall in the large spectrum of reception of this very divisive third chapter? Hello, Brian. I'm sure I'll see you in the comment section. Can't wait to hear you rip me apart. Love all you guys. Thank you so much for checking out this review series. I might do a ranking of this standalone trilogy before I do my Christopher Nolan ranking. We'll see. Don't hold me to that. But glad to finally have these movies reviewed. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Keep your eyes peeled for the next Christopher Nolan review, which will be Interstellar. And cannot wait to see Tenet, which my review will be dropping on Tuesday. So thank you guys for watching. Please like and share and hit that subscribe button if you're new to this channel. Check out the rest of my Nolan reviews. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.